Oh, hello.
Hello. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm doing all right.
All right.
Fancy seeing you here.
Yeah, fancy that. All right. Well, friends, those who are listening in on this conversation, this text that we heard read by Don this morning is presented to us in Luke's Gospel as a sermon, words that an actual teacher spoke to an actual audience in an actual time and place.
And we've realized that this text very much speaks for itself. It doesn't need our explanation or much commentary. The challenge is not understanding, but the challenge is in application, working out what this text is calling to us in this actual time and place.
So we're not technically preaching this morning, but we're more letting you eavesdrop on our conversation as two pastors wrestling with what Jesus' words mean for us and our community.
And obviously this is a setup. We have prepared and practiced this. We are not improv comedians, but we might interrupt each other. We might go off script sometimes, depending on how brave we're feeling. Some of you have been up here for this kind of thing, and you know how that goes. But either way, this is a real conversation, and our hope is that you will join in this conversation. Not in this part. You stay where you are and sit there quietly. But think about how you would respond to these things, and then afterwards at coffee time, over lunch, throughout the week, you will have opportunity to talk to those around you. And certainly Lisi and I would be glad to carry on the conversation as well. So this is part 2 of Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. It's part 2 of 3 as divided up by the lectionary planners, although we won't actually get to part 3, so you'll have to do your own homework there. This section begins with the famous call to love even our enemies, those who would seek to harm us. Well, I will read this again. I say to you who are willing to hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, offer the other one as well. If someone takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt either. Give to everyone who asks, and don't demand your things back from those who take them. Treat people in the same way that you want them to treat you. Lizzie, you were here last week. Some of these folks were too, but not everyone. Can you remind us of what Jesus was saying in part 1 and how this stuff about enemies and turning the other cheek connects back with that?
Sure, yeah, good question. So last week, Joe, you gave us this visual representation of these 4 categories of blessings and curses. So blessed are you who are poor, hungry now, those who weep, and those who are hated and excluded because of Jesus. Then on the other hand, woe to you who are rich and full, laughing and well spoken of. For those of us with the privilege to make a choice, the way is set before us. Choose life and not death. Echoing the words of Moses in Deuteronomy, we are given the choice to live well, live into shalom, a holistic peace, and live a life of solidarity with those who are poor, hungry, mourning, etc. So as you hear, the author of the Gospel of Luke is clearly interested in addressing the current social situation of the audience. It's all about the here and now. Jesus has come to declare that shalom is here. And what's more, this shalom is for everyone, Jews and Gentiles alike. So how does that relate to today's passage? Well, Jesus won't just have us sit comfortably in this binary, this rich versus poor, hungry versus full, and separate ourselves into camps as we like to do. Jesus says, love your enemies. So Jesus, the one always upping the ante, he says we're supposed to engage with our enemies. Can't I just unfriend them on Facebook? That is easier. So what do you make of these first lines here? I can sense some Anabaptist third way values here.
So that's why I haven't seen you around Facebook very lately.
Oh, no.
I get it. All right. Yeah, that's it exactly. I mean, I've heard Anabaptist biblical scholar Ched Myers this week, and oh, hey, look at that. I've got the quote right here. He was saying that this second part of Jesus' sermon is a qualification against the harshness of the curses that Jesus just spoke against the rich and powerful. Ched says, we must not weaponize the curses. We must not try to solve the problem of disparity by dehumanizing the haves or inflicting violence against them. Like you said, we're not meant to stay in our camps. The invitation isn't just to flip the binary and make sure that we curse the right people. The problem itself is the binary. It's the separation. You're probably tired of me quoting Valerie Kaur, but you are too, but she gets it. See no stranger. We are all connected. There is all oneness. You are a part of me that I do not yet know. And that is 100% Jesus' worldview as well. The poor and the wealthy are all connected. They're all part of the people of God. This binary that he's describing, that's a very shallow way of seeing. It's a shadow that divides, even traps the rich and the poor in a system that truly does not benefit anyone. And so Jesus is calling his people to see beyond the binary. As for Anabaptism, these verses are heart and soul. This stuff was drilled into me at my Mennonite high school, along with the image of Dirk Willems turning back to rescue his own prison guard who had broken through the frozen river. I mean, probably got that tattooed somewhere. That's an extreme example. Dirk is a Mennonite hero, and I know many of us have never taken that opportunity to turn the other cheek in such a direct way. But we are sincere about living this out, trying to love our enemies, or at least refusing to dehumanize them. I mean, we genuinely do this prayer. We pray for those who would mistreat us. I mean, we have this dove sticker on our wall over there on the map at Washington, D.C., because our response as a congregation to the deep harm that we see being done by the current U.S. administration, our response was, when we came together, well, let's pray for them. I mean, not that we're praying for their success, but at least out loud, we are not cursing them and wishing them harm. We are praying for God to teach them grace and mercy and wisdom, help them to be the leaders that we need them to be. And that kind of prayer helps us to see their humanity. It keeps our hearts open to learning and loving, even as we oppose much of what they are doing. What about you, this turning the other cheek bit? Have you had the opportunity to practice this upside down kind of love in your life?
Well, first of all, I want to say what a cloud of witnesses that we have that you just mentioned. So Ched Myers and Valerie Cow, Dirk Willems, love all of that. So you asked, though, about upside down love and kingdom values. So I was in my early 20s when I learned about what we call sort of third way teachings. And I feel like I had a conversation here recently with a couple folks from Wildwood, and someone asked, what does third way mean? And I feel like I did a very poor job of explaining that, or giving a definition.
You have another opportunity right in front of you.
Perfect, here we are, okay. Well, essentially, what does this mean? So can there be a third way of resisting evil, or more broadly, engaging with the world? Yes, there can be. Can there be another option other than fight or flight, to put it simply, resorting to passivity on one side and violence on the other? Can we, in a sense, disarm the oppressor and resist, perhaps even confuse them? That's what Jesus is calling us to here.
So the third way is really just there's another option. It's not just the one or two. We can open ourselves to a wider view. We can go off script. We can bring some creativity, wonder, improv to the situation in front of us. Is that what Jesus is on about here with the turning the other cheek and the giving the extra shirt stuff?
As you know, the context here of these metaphors is turning the other cheek and giving the cloak, and Jesus is using these. So essentially, when someone steals your coat, they're expecting you to fight back and to get it back. But instead, you offer your shirt as well as the coat. So kind of saying, hey, you seem really desperate. How can I help? What more can I give you? And thus, the oppressor is kind of shamed for taking everything from the other. It's not a good look. And that's what Jesus is kind of this turning the story on its head, sharing a different narrative of how to respond.
So you take what they're doing, you take that seriously, but you don't receive it in the way that they expect. And so they are caught off guard and might have a chance to think, to self-reflect, and for you to reflect as well. I follow this guy on Instagram who offers simple advice on how to respond to conflict in a professional setting, like what to say when someone insults you at work. Not that that's a real thing that we're working through, just realize that. But it could be. We'll see where this goes. He suggests simple lines that deflect and turn the conversation around, like someone insults you and you say, so is that feedback or is that frustration? Or, well, I can tell that you're getting worked up, which basically takes this pressure that they're trying to dump onto me, and it's like, nope, that's not mine, here you go, you can have it back. This guy on Instagram's a lawyer, and so this is partly a strategy to win the argument. But there can be a genuineness to this response, like, hey, that's not like you. What's going on today? And that kind of repositions both of you so that you can come alongside them with interest, with care, rather than insecurity and defensiveness. You're still resisting, hey, I'm not what you said I am. I'm still strong, but I'm respecting and touching the humanity in both of us.
No, that's great. And this feels very relevant. I feel like we're all in having these conversations with people, again, those friends on Facebook or even, right in front of you, not on the other side of a computer screen. A few years ago, I took a workshop about conflict transformation, and one of the frameworks used questions to get to people's intentions, getting to the core of what people are saying and doing. I think it's kind of seems maybe clear, the conversation partner isn't always going to like having it turned back on them, and they will resist that. They probably will. But the hope is that they will see where they are hurt inside and what they meant when they said the things they said or did. And I know in Valerie Cower's book as well, See No Stranger, she talks about creating that space so we can both see each other's humanity. But conflict transformation or resolution is a tough project, like these invitations from Jesus here. Like, for example, who do you want to be in this situation? And this kind of self-awareness and commitment to change is a necessary part of discipleship, and if that's okay, if that's right to say it that way. But
This is the way.
okay.
Transformation is the whole ballgame, ready or not.
Yeah, and another word that is important for me is curiosity, sort of continuing on this conversation. So curiosity for my own defensive reaction, and like I said earlier, this curious and humble position when thinking of the other. And you asked a few minutes ago, have I had the opportunity to turn the other cheek? Well, I was trying to think of conflict situations I've been in, or situations where I could choose a third way. So in these scenarios I'm thinking of, I wasn't subject to physical violence, thank God, but I can think of scenarios where the violence was verbal or emotional, or at the very least, things were getting heated in a conversation. And I know this has happened with some family members over the years. And in these conversations, I responded with curiosity and kindness. A kind of disarming, at least hopefully, a disarming kind of, I see you, I hear you, and I acknowledge that you are a person with valid feelings and opinions. And we never know, we don't know what's going on in their head, but I can remember times where these conversations ended up not as tense as they could have been. Or the other person responded with surprise that I could be so nice. And I say that with air quotes, adding in more air quotes, because there's clearly stuff here I'm still unpacking, because in these conversations with family members over the years, I often got, as a child and as a teenager, well, aren't you a goody two-shoes? And that still sticks with me, so I'll unpack that later. And this is a small example. My life, wasn't in danger at all. There wasn't, again, that physical violence. But we do know that violence comes in many forms. And as a sensitive person, things like negative words and negative emotions directed at me really do cut deep. So.
Yeah, no, pain is pain, and those things do cut. I still have scars from being called a goody two-shoes in grade 7. Tried to stand up for a kid who was being picked on, and whoop, all of a sudden, there's a new target for the bullies. No regrets, I guess, but yeah, that left a mark. I think one of the questions that they should have on the entrance exam for new pastors should be, have you ever been called a goody two-shoes? There's pretty strong correlation in those two groups, I'm guessing. But yeah, we're not always going to get the result that we want. Sometimes our kindness and curiosity will be met with further hostility. And sometimes we're going to mess it up. We're going to say the wrong thing. We will be the one to get worked up and defensive. This stuff takes practice. It's a real departure from the example, the things that we see around us, the script that we're being handed all the time. Conflict resolution training is a real investment. It takes time and effort and practice. So back to the text on that last line there, treat people in the same way that you want them to treat you.
Yeah, so what do you think of these kingdom ethics? Is it a lofty ideal to think that we can solve all problems with a third way and not have to resort to violence?
Lofty ideal, you say?
Yeah.
I'm in.
Okay.
Yeah, this bar of total nonviolence, that is incredibly high. And it is a place of significant privilege for someone like me to claim personal pacifism whenever I am propped up by and I contribute to a society where order is largely enforced by the threat of violence. I wear that hypocrisy for sure. But yeah, will a third way solve all of our problems? No, not likely. But that's not how I think about it. Because nothing is going to solve all of our problems. That's the idealistic, that's the unrealistic bit. We are not in control of this world. Sorry, not even you. Conflict is part of the deal. Pain and death are part of being human. That's being alive. Maybe someday, technology, humanity, whatever, will advance beyond those, but I kind of doubt it given our track record. At the very least, we can't dismiss the way of peace as being unrealistic, when it's just as unrealistic to believe that doing the same thing, this script of power and coercion that we've been following for thousands of years, to believe that that's making things better is unrealistic. It's only ever offered temporary, extremely flawed solutions. So to me, the question isn't about, will this solve our problems, but rather, is this who I want to be? In the middle of the problems, as a mortal, limited being in an out-of-control world, who will I be? Will I respond out of fear, anger, and insecurity, or will I choose to be a person of love and trust and mercy, at least starting from that place? And I don't know where that will lead. Maybe I will just end up kicking the can down the road, making the violence, the conflict, someone else's problem somewhere else. But that's also true of, that's how violence works too. So I can't see the future. I can't control the outcome with any approach. What I can do is do what I can in the moment, coming from a place of compassion. That is within my grasp. Is that still too idealistic?
Yeah, probably. But anyway, we can unpack that more. You said, and in the text it says, we're asked to be compassionate just as God is compassionate. You mentioned earlier this bar of nonviolence being pretty high, and it is. And this is connected to our view of God as well, and the bar that's set for us, so who we believe God to be. If God created the world as inherently good, God is goodness itself. And God is in the business of restoring that goodness through compassion. And we're meant to emulate all of that. Well, that we have our work cut out for us, and we can only do our best.
And do the next right thing. Anyone seen Frozen 2? Come on, it's not
Frozen.
that old.
Okay, Frozen
2.
Haven't seen that one
Better than
yet.
the first
Sorry. I'll put it on our list, Andy. Yeah. Watch
You're
some
welcome.
Disney. This is thinking about doing our best, or only doing the next right thing. There's a prayer written by an American bishop, and it's up on the screen there, as a tribute to Oscar Romero, a name that you know. So he was an El Salvadorian bishop, and he was martyred in 1980. So this prayer was actually written in the States in 1979, so written before his martyrdom, his death. But it has become a tribute to Romero and his work. It really encapsulates the work that he did on behalf of the poor and the least among the people of El Salvador, the people he was serving, and just speaking out against the government. And I love the whole prayer. Decided not to show it all today, but here are just some clips from it. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. But that is what we were about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it well. I encourage you to find that prayer and read the whole thing. It really is quite beautiful.
And do the next right thing.
And watch Frozen.
Disney didn't come up with this idea.
And speaking of Catholic examples, so in fall of 2023, I was teaching an undergrad class, and it was called Catholic Social Teaching. And about 3/4 of the way through the course, we got to a section which I was probably dreading the most. It was also when my review was going to happen, so the dean was going to sit in on the class and watch me and write notes about me. But the topic for that week was violence and the just war theory, which is rooted in Catholic doctrine. So in my prep, I was encouraged to learn that there have been advocates for peace and nonviolent action for a long time in the Catholic world. And more Catholics are moving towards an imperative of peace. When we did this whole week, this section, we ended on peace and civil disobedience. And I presented the class with a list, and I have it here, of 198 methods of nonviolent action, which was put together by Gene Sharp, sort of a pioneer in this work and doing work on nonviolent action, his seminal work from 1973. So almost 200 methods of nonviolent action that folks around the world and across time have used. And our conversations were so fascinating. Students were like, I didn't know that was a thing. everything from boycotts to fasting, singing and holding vigils, doing pray-ins, sit-ins, dance-ins, all the things. People have found many creative ways to resist what is happening around them. And to me, this is an example of third-way thinking, creative imagination that offers a breadth of options instead of always resorting to violence.
You said imperative of peace. That sounds very official. Can you say more about what that means?
Sure, without getting too much into just war theory and what that all means and the history of that, but way back in the beginning, centuries ago, just war was seen as a perfectly logical way to respond to evil, and also, and actually the church fathers are quoted as saying, it was a way to demonstrate love if it meant saving lives. So this evil that we were responding to, or in a sense the church was responding to, included theological heresy and theological dissidence, so which I find problematic, but anyway. Part of this theory is this framework or a criteria wherein all the boxes must be checked in order for war to proceed or to resort to war. So there is, and that's kind of the point of it is to me, you got to check all these boxes, all these things have to have happened, other ways to solve the crisis or the problem before we can, okay, it's time to go to war. So it is meant to be something to prove that war is there are just reasons to go to war. And war was and is seen as a way to defend truth and innocence. And this process is predicated on the assumption that war is always an option. So when I say the imperative of peace, in moving toward that imperative of peace, or a just peace, as people like Pope Francis have written, our starting point is different. Creative nonviolence, but moreover, preserving the inherent human dignity of all, oppressor and oppressed alike, becomes our foundation and our starting point. So that's the imperative of peace, or I love, as Pope Francis says, a just peace instead of a just war. So
that is so hopeful. And again, it seems grounded in identity. Our response has to honor the humanity in me and in my enemies. Mm-hmm. And that's hard, especially as we've seen over the past few months, having a common enemy is the quickest way to create unity. Mm. I keep coming back to this quote from Brian McLaren. How do you oppose hostility without becoming hostile against its promoters? How do you oppose division without dividing from dividers? How do you oppose exclusion without excluding excluders? How do you oppose rage without raging against the ragers? How do you distinguish yourself from those who need enemies to know who they are, without rendering them the enemy by whom you know who you are?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing that quote.
Raging against the Ragers sounds like a concert I want to go to, though.
Let's do it. There's always the option of starting a band or starting a podcast in today's world.
Podcast,
so
that's good.
Go for it.
Yeah, no rage on podcasts yet.
Yeah. Well, let's return to Jesus' words and this choice set before us, love our enemies. So I'll read the text again. If you love those who love you, why should you be commended? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, why should you be commended? Even sinners do that. If you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, why should you be commended? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be paid back in full. Instead, love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. If you do, you will have a great reward. You will be acting the way children of the Most High act, for God is kind to ungrateful and wicked people. Be compassionate just as your Father, your loving God, is compassionate. So can we position ourselves in humility and compassion before those we are not in the same camp with? Can we love those who hate us, do good to those who harm us, give to others without expecting anything in return? What does it look like to love, do good, and give in ways that represent the kingdom?
Oh, you're wanting an actual answer?
Yes, I am.
I was hoping you were being rhetorical.
I'm not.
I think it's back to that creative imagination piece. Jesus is again challenging conventional wisdom. Loaning money to people that you know will be able to pay it back, that's not generosity. That takes no faith. Everyone can do that. But Jesus is calling for a different world, and that begins by being honest about the limitations of the current system. Only lending to those who are guaranteed to pay it back leaves out a whole chunk of people, usually the people who need a loan the most. So do we say, too bad, so sad? Or do we take a risk to try something different? And in doing something different, we cling to that. We're stubborn about it, even when we know it might not work out the way we want it to. It might end up costing us. One example, and you're familiar with this, is the Circles of Support and Accountability, COSA, run by Micah Mission here in Saskatoon and other organizations across Canada. COSAs are small groups of 4 to 6 volunteers that gather regularly in support of a person who has recently been released from incarceration for a sexual offense. Conventional wisdom says that sexual offenders need to be kept away from society. I mean, we can't have them around kids. We have to let people know who they are, and definitely let their employers, potential employers, know what they did in the past. We got to know where they live. The neighbors need to know. We hang a big old scarlet letter around their necks. And that makes a certain kind of sense. We have to protect the vulnerable. We don't want to give offenders any opportunity to reoffend, and awareness and the publicity of that is part of that. But in many cases, that approach only reinforces the things that push the person to offend in the first place. Those feelings of isolation, the struggle with empathy and connection, feeling like the world is against them, it owes them something, all of that is increased when they have that dangerous offender sign hung around their neck. It might be accurate. Many of them will say, yeah, that is who I am, that's what I've done. But the sign, the label, is unhelpful. And the best way to keep people from reoffending is the opposite. It's leaning in, it's getting close, including them, listening to them, giving positive feedback, helping them to show what relationships are meant to look like, that kind of thing. The positive attention, deserved or not, the positive attention begins to address and heal the root causes that brought them to that place of offending in the first place. And yes, that is idealistic, and it also works. COSAs have an incredibly high success rate, far superior to any other kind of treatment or rehabilitation strategies. Caring for offenders, loving the enemy, prevents more victims. Yeah, we don't love hearing that. Yes, it is costly. I volunteer on the board for Micah Mission. It is not an efficient organization. You should still donate, but efficiency is not part of what we do. In terms of the amount of money that it takes to run these programs, and especially the amount of volunteer time it takes to provide these circles for core members, it is so costly. But it is far cheaper than prison. It's far cheaper than judges and defense lawyers and police detectives. It's far cheaper than another round of victim services, trauma counseling, all the costs to society, the personal costs of more survivors, the spiral, more trauma, the spiral continuing across generations. So yeah, the third way approach is costly and uncomfortable. But again, what kind of world do we want to live in? And will we invest our time and money in that, trusting in the outcome without being able to control it? Speaking of cost, it's telling that Jesus brings up the economics of shalom in this text as well, about lending without expecting repayment, let alone the profit of charging interest. So, light question for you. What do you make of the economic side of this teaching?
Thanks. I feel like when you were talking about describing COSA, I feel like you addressed some of that as well. It is costly and uncomfortable, and those are two very good words. But yeah, sort of coming, or as I was listening to sort of the, what is gained from that costly and uncomfortable, well, I was going to say project, but sort of enterprises that we engage in when, yeah, they can be hard and again, make us uncomfortable, but what is the outcome from that? And there is healing in that. There is wholeness, which I think we're desiring to seek and to be part of. But this question of, economic side, you gave us a great example with COSA. I'm just thinking of my own life. I really don't like financial conversations, and I get stressed out making financial decisions sometimes. My parents can tell you that. That does stress me out. But it's been really helpful, even in my own life, to make these decisions through this lens of kingdom ethics. So sometimes, just as an exercise for myself, being a very tactile, visual person, just closing my eyes and opening my hands in this position of humility and openness, holding my own finances loosely, imagining how they can be used for common good, and it really is liberating. And this is a helpful, and part of the exercise is to think about where generosity the generosity of others, those not looking to gain anything or to receive anything in return, how those examples have shaped my life and led to my flourishing as well. So when my parents arrived in Canada many years ago, the people that took them in, people from the church, took in this young immigrant family from Austria, those who didn't speak a lot of English, and they took them and cared for them, nurtured them. I'm assuming money was spent on getting my family settled and integrated into the small town that we lived in. And that has shaped the person I am today. I think of my grandparents at this time too, and as a kid who helped pay our way, paid for our travel, or helped pay for our travel to Europe, to Austria, so that we could have relationships with our extended family and the place where our ancestors came from, which is a gift and has been a gift, and again has shaped who I am. And they weren't expecting. What they got out of that was visits with their grandkids, and again, that relationship, that wholeness with them. So as I get older and as I make my own financial decisions and think of the effects that my lending and my spending have, taking this long view, this big view, really does help. And in a few minutes, Andy will share a bit about refugee sponsorship and his experience with that. And it's been so eye-opening for me and so beautiful to learn and be part of the journey with him. And I know people here at Wildwood have that experience as well of helping to support refugees and families that are coming. And it's literally, we're helping to save lives, as Andy will share. There are people who are being hunted, and this is a safe way for them and their families to live and be okay and to flourish. So, there's a lot there.
Like you said, it is costly and uncomfortable, and the refugee thing, we know how risky that can be, and what that takes from a community. And as a community, we can handle that. Mm-hmm. But thanks for sharing personally as well. I mean, speaking of creative imagination, I have a picture of what an immigrant family looks like in my head, and it's often doesn't include the person sitting right across from me. So thanks for making that connection too. One more piece of text here as we wrap this up. Be compassionate again, just as your God in heaven is compassionate. Don't judge, and you won't be judged. Don't condemn, and you won't be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good portion, packed down, firmly shaken, and overflowing, will fall into your lap. The portion you give will determine the portion you receive in return. Thoughts?
Yeah, this when I hear that, I'm particularly, the last line there stands out to me. This notion of reciprocity, has become a really important one for me. And I want to read this verse 38 from the First Nations version of the Bible. So I'll read this. The amount you measure out to others is the amount that comes back, like a basket that has been filled to the top, shaken down, and packed together until it overflows. What you give out will come back to you, full circle. And I like that last phrase, the full circle. This idea that we're all connected, and the way we move through the world and what we give to others will in some way come back as a gift to us. And I was drawn to this version of the Bible, thinking about a book I read a few years ago, Braiding Sweetgrass, which, have you read it?
Haven't read it myself.
All right.
It's on the list.
It's on the list. It's actually in the library, so you and anyone else can find it there. We bought it a few months ago, and it's sitting out there in the lobby. And it was so eye-opening and a beautiful description of how to be in the world from an Indigenous point of view. So the author, she's a botanist, Robin Wall-Kimmerer, wrote this book, and she recently released her other book, The Serviceberry, which is in our house right now, and he's reading it. But she describes this sort of reciprocity in both of these books, that we are in relationship with all our relations, human and non-human. And this ebb and flow, the give and take of our economies, our social circles, political relationships, must be grounded in mutual respect. And as I said earlier, that inherent dignity of all.
Yeah, I like what you said there, full circle. I mean, we started this sermon last week with the two camps, the haves and the have-nots, disconnected and competing, even cursing each other. And now we are at this place of connection and reciprocity. This image of my abundance, it flows to where you need, and your abundance flows back to me whenever I'm in need. And there's no shame, there's no coercion in either the giving or the receiving. Again, because all of our divisions are held in a common unity. All parts take place within wholes, and there is enough for all. Well, I'm just about out of coffee here, but in our preparations, verse 36 stood out. This be compassionate, just as God is compassionate. Some translations use the word mercy instead of compassion. What can you tell us about this word for compassion and mercy?
Yeah, well, let's turn to the Greek because, that's a lot of fun. But in the New Testament, there's the word used for compassion, and in several cases describing Jesus in his ministry, this Greek word, splagizomai.
Spaghettios,
kind of. So it actually, the root of that word is actually the core part of your body. Entrails, intestines, spaghettio, there's connection there, sure. Thanks for the image. But really, it's when this word compassion is used, especially for Jesus across the Gospels, Jesus is moved to compassion, and he acts. And this word, this moved to compassion, it's his very inmost being is moved by what he is experiencing, what he is seeing. And a lot of those instances, Jesus gets up and he acts, he heals, he speaks. It's not just that I'm feeling something warm and fuzzy inside, or my entrails are kind of going nuts right now. That's cool, I'll move on with my life. But Jesus actually acts upon what he is feeling. So that's why I am drawn to the word compassion. And so be compassionate, just as God is compassionate. And it makes me think, if I can go like the Hebrew in the Old Testament, why not? Because some of the action words, the verbs that are used, and in Hebrew culture and connotation, they are very much action words. And does that make sense what I'm saying? Like when God, X verb, God moves and does something out of that feeling. What God is, anyway, it's hard to explain that, but do you know what I mean?
Still stuck on the spaghettios.
Okay, we'll focus on the spaghettios and the splagizomai, why not? But there's an active sense in the words that are used for when God and Jesus, when they see something and they are moved to act on behalf of what they're experiencing. So I see that as an invitation for us to get to feel and to move. And with these invitations that we're given in this hard section that we've been looking at for the last 2 weeks, what does it look like? And that's what we've been asking. So
it's all about embodiment. Like it's this, and that's who Jesus is. It's this thing that has to live in us. It's not gonna. It can't just be words on a page. It is all about the movement and motion. Speaking of movement, this coffee's going right through me, so we better wrap this up here.
Thanks.
We're going to transition into a song of response here. Sword into a plowshare is the song, sometimes known as the die, die, da, die, die, die song. And this is a song that invites movement, and it is this jaunty little Irish tune, not always what we do for worship here at Wildwood, but it invites us, I think, in the words and in the music itself, this invitation to creative imagination. So I will invite you all to stand and sing, and we will get out of here. It's been delightful to talk to you.
Yeah, nice chatting with you too.
Yeah. Same time next week.
Sounds good. Thanks,
right.
Chip.